People, today we are cutting up some wood to DIY us some cute little Christmas houses. And if you don't have scrap wood to cut up at home, you can travel to Home Depot and check out their pre-cut section and get really inexpensive pieces for these projects, or really any wood projects. And if you don't have a Home Depot local to you, Dollar Tree always has small pieces you can also cut in the shape of houses. In my opinion, it's not as good of a deal as this 1x6x4 for $6.65, but it will help you get the DIYs done. For this set of wonky roof houses, we're going to cut the tops completely uneven. I used a 31.6 angle on the Mitre Saw in case you're interested, and I just cut them both different sizes. Obviously, cut your roofs however you want. Normally with common boards, you should sand them down. They can be a little bit rough, but these were pretty smooth, so I was really comfortable just grabbing some antique Waverly wax and giving these a nice thin coat. I used a little bit of water and a paper towel just to stain these on up, and then to speed up the process, I grabbed the heat gun to help me move on to our next part, which is one of my favorite parts, stenciling. I love to stencil. I grabbed these off Amazon. I will try and have these linked down in my affiliate link if you're interested in grabbing these cute little stencils. And we're going to use two different designs along with this Tim Holtz texture paste that is also down in my affiliate link. You can leave the texture paste the color it is or grab some paint like I am right here. We're going to mix this up and make it a little vanilla. I'm also going to take this decorative trim and create a little rooftop. You can pick these up from Home Depot in this little section right here, and you get 4 foot of this, which I think is a really good deal for $3.98. To make my life a little bit easier, I decided to just paint it before I started measuring and cutting it on up. I let that dry and I painted it the same vanilla color we are changing our texture paste to, and now it's time to bring in the miter shears. That's one thing I love about these little trim pieces that you can pick up from Home Depot is they're super easy to cut with the miter shears. Not everything is, okay? Shocker, but it's not. So the best advice that I can give you whenever you are cutting trim is to leave a little extra, okay? Leave a little extra, leave room for error, people, leave room for error. It has been my experience that, you know, if you leave a little extra, it's always easy to get rid of some, but if you cut it too short, you can't create some, you know what I mean? You can't create some. Once I had these at the size that I was happy with, I then put them right at the tip of the roof and marked them so we could create a beveled cut, which is basically just a slant cut like this. You're going to place the little piece of trim where you have it marked in your miter shears. Hold it very steadily, people. Hold it very steadily. We don't want to lose no digits. I am not responsible for your muck-ups, okay? I'm just not. In order to get that bevel cut to match up with the other side, you have to switch the angle that you're cutting the miter shears and then do the same exact cut. It might not be a perfect, you know, match, which if you want to get fancy schmancy with it, grab some caulk, grab some spackling, smush it in where there's any gaps, or even chalk paint. If it's a tiny gap, that chalk paint will fill up some gaps, okay? I was not worrying about it for this project. I wanted it to look rustic anyway, so I just took some wood glue. I put it on half of our little piece of trim, and then I took some hot glue for the bottom piece of the trim. This way we got our immediate hold, so I could measure it in spot or in its space so it was even, and then I pressed it on down. Once I was done putting this little trim on our houses, I did notice there was some wood showing through with the trim, so I took some of that vanilla paint and just went right over it to cover that up. The Tim Holtz paste is super easy to work with. It's inexpensive, it's non-toxic. I really like this stuff, and it also blends well with colors. I mixed just a tiny amount up. A little bit goes a long way 90% of the time. Sometimes I wish I had a little bit more. And then I grabbed the painter's tape to tape our stencil down. You want to make sure that you do this whenever you're doing a raised stencil, or really any stencil, and cover any sections like I am here that you're worried about showing on your wood piece. So this way, just the design that you want shows up. But people, if I'm being real, sometimes, okay, the stencil's small and I can't fit painter's tape, so I will just like hold it down and pray. but it really does help with bleed through whether you're painting or doing a raised stencil. So if you can use painter's tape to hold your stencil in place, it's always a good idea. And people, look at that. It's so beautiful. I did the same exact thing, tape our little stencil down. And on this one, we're just going to use the little sleigh and the presents. I recommend waiting at least 24 hours before you pop a sealer on here. You could use some Mod Podge, poly, whatever makes you fuzzy inside. I'm probably just going to throw some Mod Podge on these. You can resell these. You can obviously keep them for your own home decor, give them as gifts, but they are absolutely stunning. This tiny little house DIY here is super easy to do. If you find little houses like this, you could easily recreate this, or you can cut them down, grabbing some wood like I did from Home Depot. These are 1x2x4 and they're only $2.22. That's a lot of wood for your money. Did that come out wrong? Anyhow, just pick out 2 different colors. Okay, this way you're getting 2 different DIYs, but it's still a matching set. I'm using this crimson red and this celery. Both are by Waverly, but use whatever brand you want. And these little transfers from Dollar Tree. Now, I'll be the first one to tell y'all, people, these are not the easiest little transfers to use. It takes some elbow grease, so be mindful. I love using transfers to kind of bring 2 different pieces together because you can use the same transfer and then it makes them look like a matching set, even if they're different colors and different sizes. These, however, are just a little rough to use. I found that even after I have these on, they tend to flake. So taking some Mod Podge and just going over them quickly is a really good idea. We're going to create some beautiful stain art on this little wide house I cut down. And people, if you're interested in how to cut down little wood houses or use a Mitre Saw, this has some basic information about how to do all that. I'll pop this video down in the description box for you. After we get our stain art on here, we're going to use a stencil to pop some ornaments on here. Obviously, put whatever type of stencil you want. To get started with our stain art, grab you some acrylic paints and a little bit of water. People are always asking what the ratio is. Usually I use a couple tablespoons of water, and honestly, the ratio to paint depends on you. The darker you want the color, obviously, the more paint you want. I just mixed 2 different red colors in here to get what I thought made sense for the piece. Obviously, do whatever colors you want to use. The top of this, I started with red, and the bottom, we're going to start mixing this English ivy first. And then I had this Christmas green. I felt it was really deep green with just this color. So I had to pop in a little bit of brightness in there. And that gave me just enough. I'm using 2 different paintbrushes for this process. And you'll notice that this is allowing our wood grain to shine through. And it is tinting the wood, the colors that we have mixed here. I want to blend them together, which is not always an easy thing because you can see that red line is already on the wood. So we're going to have to blend that out to meet the green so we don't have a harsh line. This can be a little tedious, but I promise if you keep your wood wet. Did that come out right? Is that the right term? It is. It's the right term. You got to keep the wood wet. If you allow these to start to dry, how I already mucked up and had that red harsh line there, you got to do what I'm doing here and overlap the red even more to make it darker and then go back and forth. This can be really tedious. It took me about 30 minutes to actually blend these together, but it's so worth it once it's dry, how it gives you that beautiful ombre effect from one to the next. Just don't look at the back. It's still got a little bit of a line. Okay. We don't see this. For this house, I wanted to pop a little chimney on this joint. So I had these square dowels that I picked up from Home Depot. You get 36 inches for just over $3, which I feel like is a really good price. So it never hurts to have these pieces in your arsenal. We're gonna need to bring in the miter shears to cut this sucker down. Well, at least I thought, because I gotta be honest with you people. As I was trying to cut this, I don't know who I'm kidding. I need the miter saw. I definitely had to call on the miter saw to save my hands. The miter shears were not doing me any justice. To cut this shape, you're going to just leave the top part of our chimney straight and slant the bottom on a 45 or 31.6 angle. I decided to just paint this green so it matched the bottom of our house. And for our stencil piece, I'm going to use Dixie Belle's Gold Gilding Wax and a tiny little paintbrush. I do want to stress that if you have time, take your time doing this. I rushed through it, so it wasn't as precise as I wanted it to be, especially where the stars are. So just be mindful of that. Gilding wax isn't like a paint, so when you're applying it, it can be a little bit messier with the bleed through. I did try to go back over it and move the stencil in precise little sections to adjust the stars. It turned out okay. I do wish I took a little bit more time to get those precise little sections. I also went over this with some more of the gilding wax with a light brush and took some of our wood glue and hot glue to attach the chimney. For this little house set, we're going to need one small house and one large house. Both are 1 inch in thickness, so it makes sense to use these as a set. However, we're going to create 2 entirely different designs, starting with some Mod Podge on this larger piece to get a nice healthy layer of it to create an iron-on method with some decoupage paper. Normally, you want to create a base so your design pops through on the paper. Painting it white is a good rule of thumb, but if your background on your paper or your napkin, whatever you're ironing on, is brown, you can get away with leaving your wood neutral. This tends to take a little bit to dry, so we're going to push that house to the side and work on our tiny baby house using a little snowflake from this mold with my favorite clay, this creative paper clay. And people, when it comes to clay, to each their own. Everybody has their favorites. I've tried several different kinds. I struggle with hand grip strength issues, and this stuff is just super easy to mold and it never gives me a problem. So I love using this stuff. It also sands up really well. So if you're using this with furniture and you want to sand down pieces around corners, it sands beautifully. I was really impressed with the detail when this popped out. I knew that these were pretty little molds and really inexpensive off Amazon, but I was super happy with the detail once they came out. I took a little bit of wood glue and put a little circle right in the center and just gently smooshed our little snowflake on here. Now it's time to bring in our decoupage paper. This is Holiday Spirit from my TDS Decoupage Paper line that can be found at thediystruggle.com. These are 17 by 23 inches, and this particular design has several options for you to choose from. This is created with tissue paper, so you can take a little bit of water on a paintbrush to get some really exact tears, or you can just rip it by hand. It is tad bit thicker than a napkin, super easy to work with. Since I know I'm going to be sanding off any extra around the house, I'm just taking scissors and cutting out our little rectangle here, and then I am placing it exactly where I want it on the house. And people, feel free to decoupage whatever you want on here, take the idea and remix it to what works for you. I just really wanted to use this design. Now we're going to need to bring in the parchment paper and tear us off a little piece so we can put this over the TDS decoupage paper. Now you're going to need to bring in the iron, and whatever iron you want will work for this. It has not been my experience that you need to have high temperatures just to do a simple iron-on method, unless you're using cling wrap and fabric. We're not going to get into that. I also want to let y'all know, for those of you that I get comments from talking about small irons and not wanting to pay for the Cricut mini iron, Walmart has a really small option for about 10 bucks. When you remove the parchment paper, check your ironing job. It should all be nice and snug on here. Everything should be tough when you're pulling it. If it comes off at all, plop that parchment paper right back down on there and get your iron one just for a little bit longer. Take a sander and go around the edges. If you want to be wild and do the burn method, you do you. This works best for me, and it comes off easily. And the best part is with this, when you leave your wood neutral and it has a tan background, it looks like butter. It is beautiful. There's no wrinkles. It is flawless. You cannot tell where the paper ends and where the wood begins. Usually the clay takes some time to dry, but I get impatient, and for little tiny pieces, don't tell nobody, I take the heat gun to it and it dries up fairly quickly. I took some red to match our decoupage paper and carefully painted up our little snowflake. Added a little bit of gold gilding wax to bring out those details, and I cannot tell you how much I love this set. This is a nice chunk of 2x6. Look at this chunky house. Anyhow, we are going to just give this a nice coat of Waverly chalk paint, or any chalk paint will do. It usually just needs one coat with a chalk paint. And we're going to grab some stamps for this project. Any stamps will do. Got these off Amazon, fairly inexpensive. What I personally liked about this stamp set is I had a little bit of everything. I had some words, I had some snowflakes, I had a little deer on here. And I don't know where my stamper piece is. I know I own one somewhere that, you know, you put the stamps on. So I'm just using this other stamp for the meantime. Sometimes you gotta wing it, people. What do I keep telling you? We're gonna get there, okay? We're gonna get there with or without that stamper piece. See, we got the little deer down. Now I am taking the Merry Christmas one, stamping it on up on the little ink pad, and then pressing it in the top corner. And then I also pop some little snowflakes on here as well. Just a really nice little bundle of stamps, some versatility. And then I decided to distress it using the ink pad itself. And I love how gorgeous this turned out. People, we are going to get really artsy fartsy on this house, and I'm going to go over a couple techniques with you so you can recreate this piece at home, or, you know, something like it, or use the techniques to create something you want. First, we're going to need to create a base. You can pick whatever color you want. I'm choosing to use black, and I'm doing it with a chalk paint. I'm spraying a little bit of water here just to be able to thin out our chalk paint. Chalk paint can be clumpy, and water can help, one, the paint go longer, and two, it should just apply really smooth. Plus, I like that sometimes it leaves a little bit of that wood grain show through. Now you're gonna need some crackle. Have you used this before? It's amazing. If you haven't, it's also in my Amazon affiliate down in the description box. I love this stuff. Sammy over at Unicorn Dust Design put me onto this a hot minute ago. I have been using it ever since. A couple little tips and things to know when you're working with this medium. It's super thin. It's not forgiving. So be purposeful with your placement. I plan on decoupaging iron on method napkin right in the center of this. So I know I'm going to need to paint it white. I am making sure to not put any of the crackle in the very center. Let this dry completely. You don't want to start going over this with paint before it's dry. Now, since I'm decoupaging the center, I want the design on my napkin to pop through. So I am putting one layer on the center in white before I cover the entire house. This way the center will have 2 layers of white. You only get 1 layer with the outside because you, for some odd reason, cannot go over the crackle more than once. And it's going to look weird at first. You're going to be like, oh, there's paint stripes. Trust me, once the crackle starts taking effect, it's not going to matter. You're not going to care. It looks scary, especially when you're doing furniture pieces, but the crackling almost starts immediately. And you can take a heat gun to make it more dramatic as it's drying. You can see right here, I haven't even started the whole house, and where we started, it's already starting to crackle up just a little bit. I give you a better view in just a second, but a tip I do want to share that I think is a good one to try out is to load your brush up and just go up in stripes. Put a decent amount of paint and just pull it all the way up. And like I said, it's not going to matter. Right now you can see the individual brush strokes, but once the crackle starts really taking effect, everything's just going to blend together seamlessly. Since I'm ironing on a very thin white background napkin with a very, very light design, it was important to not have that crackle on the center so it didn't pop through the napkin. If you go to iron on a napkin with something like this, make sure that your crackle and paint is all dried up. And look at that, people. Look how stunning that is. I love the way that looks. But you're going to make sure that this is all dry, okay? Before you apply your Mod Podge. Here's our beautiful napkin, and I'm going to just take and tear out this design. The cool thing about this particular napkin is it's on each one of the little squares. So you really get 4 little designs, 4 opportunities to use this. And for those interested, yes, this particular napkin is in my Christmas bundle on my website. You can use water on a paintbrush to tear it if you want. I knew I wasn't getting too specific here, so I just tore it all up with my hands. And then you need to get those sneaky layers off of the decorative layer. We're just going to be working with the top decorative layer. You'll be able to see your hand through it. It's so thin. If you do your job when you're creating a piece like this, especially when you got that crackle on there, you're not going to be able to see where this napkin ends and where the paint starts. So it's important to go around the design where it's going to blend in with that paint and the crackle. So to get a more detailed edge, I am just taking a little bit of water on a tiny, tiny little paintbrush and curving it into where that crackle starts. So once we get that napkin ironed on here, it's going to look absolutely seamless. Take your Mod Podge and put a nice, thick, healthy layer on here all the way out to the edge. Just cover the entire piece. And I say this because if you don't, you're going to be able to see where the Mod Podge wasn't, and it'd be uneven once you put it on over as a sealer. Once it's all dry, it's time to get your iron on. So grab you some parchment paper and lay it gingerly over top of your napkin, and then grab your iron and go over this. Couple minutes, well, really, it only takes a couple seconds. But if you're anything like me, you might do it for 2 or 3 minutes. And people, look how flippin' flawless this application is. You cannot tell where the napkin ends. It's stunning. I have done the iron-on method so many times, people. But when you're using the crackle for whatever reason, the napkin just blends so stunningly into that medium, and you cannot tell that this is not one piece. This little house is probably one of my favorite pieces I have ever decoupaged, and it's so flippin' simple. First, you're going to take some Mod Podge and just put a nice healthy layer all over the front, because we're going to iron our TDS Decoupage Paper right on the front of this. Set this to the side and let this dry. I picked these little pieces up at Home Depot. I thought they would look awesome as a little chimney. These are little copper, metal flat shoe thingies, and they're just $2.34. And they fit right on top of these little square dowels perfectly. So you just cut an angle, 31.6 or a 45-degree angle, whatever angle is going to fit your roof that you have cut, and you're going to glue that little flat shoe thingy right to the top. I'm painting this black because I am going to paint the roof black, and it matches our little flat shoe thingy. And here is the design that we're going to be ironing on here. I absolutely love this little reindeer piece. This is part of the TDS Decoupage Paper line, and the paper is called 'Tis the Season. If you're interested, that can be found at thediystruggle.com. The link is down in the description. And people, take any of these decoupage ideas and remix them to whatever works for you. Use whatever kind of paper, use whatever kind of napkins you want. This is just what I want it to use to inspire you and give you ideas. I'm taking a little bit of water here on a paintbrush and just pulling off the edges. It is my personal opinion that this blends better than having sharp cut edges. So I'm just going around the edges, kind of fraying it. I want to dingy this up just a bit. So I'm taking a little bit of water with some antique Waverly wax just on my fingers and going all around the edges of this paper. When I was happy with that, I put this in place right in the center of our house. Grab some parchment paper and brought in the iron. Give this a nice rub with the iron for a minute or two. I like to do like 2 to 3 minutes, really, just to feel fuzzy inside. Some people might do just a couple seconds. It probably doesn't really take that long, but I just feel fuzzier inside 2 to 3 minutes. And then I pull up the little piece, check to make sure everything is secured all around the edges. And if it is, I'm on to the next step, which in this case is rubbing some antique Waverly wax all around the entire piece. I painted the roof black, glued on our little chimney top, and stuffed some greenery down in that chimney just to add a little extra something. I love how this piece turned out. It's so rustic. It's absolutely stunning. People, as always, thank y'all so much for hanging out with me today. And until next time.